Hello, I'm Teresa Tillman, and this is my presentation on women in leadership today. This is really a summary of a conversation that I had with Melissa Henry Menard, who I consider a friend and someone I often turn to for leadership advice. She is a very dynamic leader. She has great business savvy. She's incredibly bright and has a great sense of humor. Um, Melissa's faced a couple of setbacks in her career, but once she found her stride, she's taken off. I chose to record my interview with Melissa because she's very engaging and does such a nice job articulating her journey, some of which I'll share through video clips. Now, Melissa and I may not always see eye to eye, but she always does have a very interesting take on topics relative to leadership. So that's what we'll go through. We'll talk a little bit about Melissa, the role she plays today, some things she finds rewarding in the role she's in, and then when she is experiencing challenges, what does she turn to as her source for courage and resiliency? And then just talk through some lessons that she's learned from her past, what she's doing today as a Black woman in corporate America, and what lessons does she think leaders need today. So first, a little bit about Melissa. Melissa Henry Menard. She is the executive vice president at CAC Specialty for their healthcare practice. So that is an insurance broker, and what that means is Melissa is responsible for you have client and you have the insurance industry, and then you have the broker in the middle. So Melissa is responsible for assisting organizations, her clients, with finding the right healthcare insurance that fits their needs as well as the needs of their employee population. And so prior to her role at CAC, she also was the managing director at Beecher Carlson, doing some similar work with their healthcare practice. She actually helped stand up theirs, and she is standing up one at CAC. She's held a variety of leadership positions throughout the years, including chief of staff for sales and account service at Blue Cross and Blue Shield, and spent 12 years at Liberty Mutual in a variety of roles. Melissa is the proud graduate of Simmons College, as it was back then. It's now Simmons University. She holds an MBA from Babson College, and she also sits on various boards, volunteer boards, because giving back to her community is extremely important to her. Specifically, she sits on a couple of boards with schools because she understands the value of education, especially for children in underserved and underrepresented communities. And just to round it out, Melissa is a wife. She's the proud mom of a 7-year-old son. She has a dog, and she's an avid skier, as well as she has a fabulous shoe collection that's to die for. And speaking of her son, you'll hear him serenading us in the background in a couple of clips. So, the things that Melissa finds most rewarding about the work that she does, she is a self proclaimed insurance geek. So, the work she's doing in standing up the healthcare practice at CAC, it is incredibly rewarding. Really, it gives her that opportunity to put all of the skills that she's gained throughout the year, throughout her career, to use. This role is really a culmination of all of the stops along the way. But in that, there is a source of pride for her. The insurance brokerage industry is typically male dominated and white male dominated, to be specific. And most of the women in the industry at her level typically don't look like her. So for her to be able to be a Black woman leading a practice, being in the room and at the table is definitely a source of pride. And with that, she's hoping that she can set the proper example and be an inspiration that maybe there's a young Melissa out there working hard in the underwriting world and they can see her and see her career trajectory and to know what's possible. So, in this way, representation definitely matters. Um, some of the other things that have been rewarding in the wake of 2020 social justice reform, Melissa really led the charge in standing up a DE&I council at her previous employer, but one didn't exist before. She saw the need and she definitely filled it. And she was also named Business Insurance's 2022 Woman to Watch. So she, as I mentioned, is definitely dynamic. So through all of this, like so many of us, the road has not always been easy. Melissa has faced her share of challenges and setbacks, but yet she presses on. Some of those challenges, as I mentioned, she's a Black woman in a white male dominated space. So there are those challenges. She faces microaggressions, challenges to her credibility, surprise that she's the one leading the presentation or the sales drive. Um, and so there's that to navigate on a sometimes daily basis. Um, and standing up a healthcare practice is difficult. There's long hours, lots of travel, getting new sales. So that means time away from her family. So she's challenged with trying to figure that all out while still being an example to her team and other women who may be watching her. And so, what she points to as her beacon of light is her mom. Her mother, Bridget, was in banking way back in the day when there weren't a lot of women in banking and not a lot of brown women in banking. And so she looked at her mother's example at being resilient and uses that in her day to day. Also, she has a family and a team who's watching her. And so she also points to that as her motivation as well as a factor into her resiliency. In this clip from the interview, you'll hear her speak about that in her own words.
So there's a couple things that I would say. So one, my mom, right? You hear me talk about my mom all the time, and I am incredibly fortunate. My mom was a banker when brown women with funny accents weren't bankers. So I learned a lot.
She's Trinidad.
I'm from my mother's from Trinidad, yes. So don't tell her I said she had a funny accent. But I learned so many things just by watching her. And I would guarantee she had to deal with far worse than I deal with on my worst possible day. So, my mother's bad days were probably far worse than my worst. Like, I'm not saying that right. Like, my worst day pales in comparison to whatever her worst day would have been in her experience, right? So there's that, right? So I think about that. And I also think about, I'm a mom, right? I'm a wife. And my family relies on me, and that part will motivate you as well, right? I want my son to see me, rising through the ranks, and I want him, when he gets older, to be so proud of his mom. And I pride myself on just, doing a lot of the things that I do to create a better life for my son, for my family. And that really motivates me a ton. So when going back to the times when there's situations where it's like you're just ready to lose it, it's like, I got other people that are counting on me, so
Exactly.
all those things probably
Have the luxury of blowing your top.
that's exactly right. The privilege, right? I don't have the privilege of doing that, right?
Absolutely.
So you take all those things, you put them in a shaker and mix them all up, and then that's what kind of, in my opinion, gives you, the resiliency, the strength, the courage, the chutzpah, whatever word you want to use,
Right.
to get up and live to fight another day. The other thing that I would note is in this role and in my previous role, my team was all women. So there's that added, I call it a responsibility, some people would call it a burden. I have that added responsibility. They are watching me,
Okay.
right? So they're just like I learned from watching my mom, or I learned from watching other leaders. They're watching me to learn what to do when they ascend to the next level, right? So it's sometimes it's daunting because there's times that I know someone needs to be called out, and I could likely get away with it. But it's the situation, like, I don't want them thinking that that's the path that they should take, because the consequences might be more dire for them than they would be for me. So that's another piece of that whole mixture that I was talking about that plays
true.
into it. So there's a couple things that I would say. So one, my mom, right? You hear me talk about my mom.
So you've heard a few things from Melissa in her own words. And so, with that, some more lessons that Melissa learned throughout her career, and one specifically from her past that is one she talks about often, and one that has stayed with her throughout the years. So, at the very beginning of her career, Melissa had joined Liberty Mutual in the accounting department. Her then manager, shortly after joining, kept encouraging her to reach out to the underwriting department. She's an underwriter by training. To reach out to the underwriting department to set up informational interviews with underwriting. Melissa completely misunderstood what was happening there and thought somehow she was being kicked out of her job. and kind of doubled down and started working even harder. But really, what was happening is that her boss was setting her up for success. She saw something in Melissa and knew that underwriting would be a better fit for her and for her talents. So, although Melissa leaving the team would represent a deficit for that manager and for her team, she did what was in the best interest for Melissa. And that's what really started her on this insurance road that she's currently on. And that's a lesson that Melissa never forgot, that as a leader, you sometimes have to be selfless. And although it would be a hit to you, you do what's in the best interest of your team and the individuals within the team. So that's one lesson that has stayed with her, and she tries to behave in a similar fashion. As you heard her say, she does lead a team of women. And so she's very cognizant of this. I also asked Melissa about, as being a Black woman, with having that as part of her social identity, um, what are some of the challenges to that? And just in summary, and you'll hear more from her in a video clip, uh, she doesn't take things personally. She really decides which hill she wants to die on by picking her battles. She doesn't allow words to take away her power, and she assumes positive intent when she can and gives grace. She realizes this topic, the way she sees it, might not always fly as well, especially in an audience of women, but she has an interesting take on one that I think is worth listening to. So, speaking of that, I wanted to talk about your social identity as one of your, a couple of the characteristics of your social identity as being a Black woman.
Yeah.
Um, so, what's been most helpful for you, knowing that and the challenges that come with that as you lead others?
It's a good question, Teresa. I think I talk about this a lot. Well, I shouldn't say a lot. I talk about it a lot in certain spaces. You know a lot about my background, but I'll share it. So I grew up in the birthplace of the American Navy. Does anything more really need to be said? I say that half tongue in cheek, but we were one of the, if not the first Black family in that town, and certainly it had its challenges, but it was also a wonderful experience, growing up in such a beautiful town on the water. Having said that, you develop a lot of resiliency, you develop a lot of thick skin, and quite frankly, you need it, right? Anybody that's out here that thinks that microaggressions don't exist, or a dog whistle, or just full-on bullhorns don't exist, they do. I will tell you, as recently within the past 3 months, I was at a meeting in a southern state where all the sales guys, and they were all guys, were on one side of the room doing all the talking, and all the lovely ladies who probably did all the work were on the other side of the room not talking. And it was interesting because the gentleman who I run the practice with, he leaned over to me and he was like, I think you need to present the entire pitch of our healthcare practice, because they need to see it, right? So I say all that to say that, look, it's not for the faint of heart. You've got to have thick skin. You've got to be resilient. And this may not fly well, particularly with our audience, an all-women audience, but some stuff, I just can't take it personally, right? There's just some stuff, do I want to flip a table? Do I want to get upset about it? Sure, but some things, I got to pick my battles, right?
Exactly. You have to decide which hill you want to die.
That's exactly right. And don't get me wrong, the other thing I would add to that is, they don't define who I am. Someone wants to make a comment about women or Black people or some whatever. Sure. Is it bothersome and does it make me angry? But at the same time, why am I surrendering why am I giving them that much power?
Absolutely.
Right? So it's all
deciding which one is the most important.
Absolutely. Sometimes there's teachable moments. Sometimes there are just bright red lines that can't go unchecked. But then other times, there's an opportunity to kind of say, let's talk about that a little bit. Right. Or, that's not really funny. Or however you address it in the moment. I think we just, I say this to my team a lot. I'm like, look, let's always assume positive intent and let's extend people grace. Right. That is sometimes harder, easier said than done. And you know me well enough to know that is not one of my strong suits. But again, going back to that kind of responsibility, right?
That's exactly
if I want to, I stand on the shoulders of other women. And if I want women to be able to stand on my shoulders, I can't flip a table every time I get upset that somebody says something that's off color, or something that I was probably could have chosen your words better.
Right. So speaking of that, I wanted to talk about. So next, I talked to Melissa about what lessons she thinks that leaders, specifically women leaders, need today. And in her usual fashion, she flipped it around on me and had a very interesting take that you'll hear in the video clip. But in summary, her thoughts were embracing authenticity, being unafraid to show vulnerability, and asking for help, not being afraid to ask for help. But again, more from Melissa. Um, what lessons do you think most important for leaders to learn, especially women leaders?
So I'm gonna turn that around a little bit. So I would advocate that our male counterparts can learn from. We actually just did a session on this when I was traveling last week. We had an executive leadership meeting, and one of the things that I think our male counterparts can learn from a lot of successful women leaders is that being authentic. I think I know that is so overused.
It is.
And
oh, it's really you're
they don't
always use it in the right way.
And when I say being authentic, and you and I have talked a lot about this, when I talk about being authentic, like, you have to establish credibility with your team. And I say to my team at least once a day, I don't know. Because I don't know the answer.
That's part of being authentic.
That's part of being, like, I'm not, and I tell people all the time, I'm not the smartest person in the room.
Right.
Ask my teammates. Like, I hire people that are smarter than me for a reason, because they're smarter than me. So don't ask me the hard questions. Ask them.
It's funny. One of the examples in the book says exactly that. It's almost verbatim.
And I haven't even read it. Look at that. It's that Simmons education.
That's Simmons education. That's exactly it.
So I think about that. Like, it's also like a professional maturity. Like, I don't feel as though I mean, I have things to prove. Like, I have to hit my numbers, and we have to execute on the things that we're being measured on. But, like, I don't have something to prove as far as, like, do I belong in the room? Because I know that I belong in the room. So that's where that authenticity. Like, I think that's where people really kind of show up in a way that's not productive, because they're showing up almost, not confident, or not confident enough in themselves. So they show up, right, being the person that they think people want at the table. Like, no, people want me at the table. And so that's a big one. So I, as much as I can't stand the authenticity word, because it's just overutilized.
But used in the right
but
way.
Being genuine and true to yourself, not compromising your core values. Right, and you'll always struggle with that.
I swear I didn't read the book.
No, I really haven't read the book. I really haven't. The times when I have not done well at a firm or worked for a particular individual, it's because our core values are out of alignment. Right. And there are some people that can navigate around that, but if you're really a genuine person, and that's not a slight to anybody, but you are constantly at odds with your inner self. That's very uncomfortable for me.
Right.
So it's very hard for me to be in those positions. So,
what lessons do you think So we've heard a lot from Melissa in how her views on leadership. So in conclusion, we've met Melissa, a powerhouse leader, really blazing a trail in the insurance world. We heard her talk about her mom. We heard her talk about themes that we've been learning in class: resiliency, authenticity, aligning your values with your actions, staying true to those values, and for her, those are her North Star. She also talked a bit about that you didn't hear the strength of her team and really valuing your team, advocating for them, shining a light on them so that they receive recognition, and taking the heat when some things don't go quite so well. So it was a very interesting conversation that I had with her, very spirited. So I thank you for your time and watching, and goodbye.